following video is all about living in the media age and logical fallacies. So in this chapter, we're going to talk a great deal about the ways that we receive information in the world today. It may not seem very mathy to discuss these things such as logical fallacies, analyzing arguments, premises, and conclusions, but really it's an important part of mathematics because it's rooted in logic. And so all of the rules of math are based in some set of logic. And so understanding logically how things are constructed is going to make you a better mathematician. In addition, it's going to allow you to better process the information that you receive in the world around you. When people are trying to mislead you with certain facts and try to persuade you with certain opinions, it's important to know when they're bending the rules in a certain way and what we should be looking for when we want to evaluate a piece of information to see if it's logically sound. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about premises and conclusions. We're going to talk about the different types of logical fallacies. And then lastly, we'll talk about the 5 different steps to evaluating information we find in the media. So first we want to talk about the different parts of an argument. So an argument is built upon 2 different important pieces. The set of facts or assumptions that people use. We kind of explain the world around us using these assumptions or these facts that we observe. Those are called premises. And all of those premises are delivered to us in order to convey some sort of a conclusion. So somebody wants to prove a point to you, then they give you some examples or they give you some observations that allow some support, and then they tell you their conclusion or the opinion that they believe based on what those observations are. So it's going to be really important for you when we look at arguments to be able to break those 2 pieces down and say, okay, this part of the argument is the premise and this part of the argument is the conclusion. And then once we're able to do that, we can talk about how people use those premises to falsely support a conclusion. And those are called fallacies. They're deceptive arguments or arguments where the conclusion's not well supported. So our first example here, we're going to identify the premise and conclusion of the following argument. It says Ford makes the best pickup trucks in the world. More people drive Ford trucks than any other light truck. So we have a kind of a fact-ish, and we have an opinion in these 2 sentences here. One of them represents the premise, and one of them represents the conclusion. Remember that the premise should be those observations, those facts or assumptions that we use to explain the world around us. Ford makes the best pickup trucks in the world. This first statement is not a premise. It's not an observation that you're going to look around the world and say, oh, I saw the best pickup truck in the world today. No, the premise or the observation would actually be the second sentence in here. More people drive Ford trucks than any other light truck. You could certainly observe that in your day-to-day surroundings as you're roaming around, seeing lots of Ford trucks drive around. You could say, wow, I see a lot of Ford trucks around here. More people drive those than any other light truck. That would be a premise. Now, if you wanted to go and make a conclusion like, oh, they must make the best pickup truck in the world, then that would be, supported by your premise. And so in this statement, the second sentence is actually our premise, and the first sentence is our conclusion. In the second example, we do the same. We want to identify the premise and the conclusion of the following argument. Again, you can pause this video if you like, just to kind of identify what they are first. In this example, this is much more of a standard or conventional premise first, conclusion second. So this first statement says many people are sentenced to death due to mistakes or careless work by policemen or prosecutors. So that's an observation about mistakes in the death penalty. And then the conclusion afterwards, therefore the death penalty should be abolished. So here we have a sound premise and we have a supportive conclusion. Now we're going to talk about the different types of logical fallacies that exist. For this section, what you're going to need to do is be able to isolate certain pieces of these arguments so that you can label whether it's an appeal to popularity or so on and so forth. There are 10 of them. You're going to need to know 8 of them really, really well. And I will support this lecture with a handout so you guys can kind of get an idea of how to break them down. But on a mini project or on an exam, usually what's given is a handful of logical fallacies, and then you are asked to match up different logical fallacies with their descriptions. So the first one we're going to talk about is appeal to popularity, which we actually just mentioned a minute ago in the first example with the Ford trucks. The statement is that many people believe P is true, therefore P is true. Appeal to popularity is essentially just saying if it's the most popular, it must be the best. But that's not necessarily true. That the most popular doesn't necessarily mean the highest quality. Best, quote unquote, is subjective anyways. And so an example down here that I mentioned was McDonald's sells more hamburgers than any other restaurant, therefore they must make the best hamburgers in the world. Well, I assure you that many of you can tell me other burger places that are tastier than McDonald's hamburgers, even though McDonald's sells more hamburgers than any other restaurant in the world. And so, appeal to popularity, again, is a fallacy. Just because it's the most popular, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best. The second type of logical fallacy we're going to discuss is false cause. What I think of for false cause is superstitions. In logic, it means A came before B, therefore A caused B. But of course, just because something happened before something else doesn't necessarily mean that it has a causal relationship. The example on here was I placed the crystal on my forehead and in 5 minutes my headache was gone. Therefore, the crystal made my headache go away. Well, maybe the quartz crystal had nothing to do with your headache whatsoever. Maybe you drank some water 20 minutes before, now your body's hydrated, or one of the millions of other things that could cause a headache that went away. I don't see any biological reason why putting a crystal on your forehead would make your headache go away. So I'm going to say that's a false cause. Like I said, superstitions are all good examples of false cause. I stepped on a crack and my mom broke her back the next day. I guess I caused it to happen when I stepped on that crack, right? Or a black cat crossed my path and I failed my math exam. It's that black cat's fault, right? Those are all false causes. So if you're taking notes right now aside, think superstition when you think false cause. The next one is appeal to ignorance. So appeal to ignorance is basically just saying just because there's no proof doesn't mean that we can immediately say something is false. And so the example I put on here was, I guess I didn't get the job. They didn't call me back. Well, just because they didn't call you back doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't get the job. Maybe they're waiting for you to call and inquire about it. Or maybe they're, a number of different reasons. Maybe they're going to call everybody at the end of the week and tell who got the job and who didn't. But just because something didn't happen doesn't necessarily mean that everything is terribly wrong and that it's all false. An existence of aliens is another really good appeal to ignorance. Somebody may say, we have no evidence that aliens exist. I don't have an alien spacecraft that's landed in my backyard, or I don't have any pictures of an alien that's landed on Earth. Therefore, there's no such thing as aliens, right? That's an appeal to ignorance because you don't have all of the facts, right? You don't know all the different kinds of life on every planet in the universe. And so just because you don't have the information in front of you doesn't necessarily mean you can dismiss it as not true. The next one is called hasty generalization. So hasty generalization is similar to false cause, but the difference is that hasty generalization is more of a jumping to conclusions too early. So you see some evidence that makes you think that two things are related, and you immediately think, without looking at enough cases, this must be true all of the time, right? The example here came from the book. 2 cases of childhood leukemia have occurred along the street where high voltage power lines run. Therefore, the power lines must be the cause of these illnesses, right? Well, we're looking at 2 isolated cases of childhood leukemia. I mean, how many other children in the world live near high voltage power lines that do not have leukemia, right? So just looking at those 1 or 2 examples and saying, oh, this happens all the time, that's not necessarily true. A fantastic example is vaccinations. People, like particularly autism, we had a study that came out in the late 90s that's been debunked multiple times now that talked about, if you give your kids vaccines, that there's some chemical in there that can cause autism. And here are 2 kids that got vaccines and now all of a sudden they have autism. Well, first of all, there are millions and millions of other children that get vaccines every single year who do not get autism. Number two, a big reason is around the time that kids go to get vaccinated before they go back to school. There's a lot of the same time frame where certain autistic symptoms can arise, and so maybe you brought your child in to get vaccinated, and doctor noticed some certain behavioral symptoms and thought maybe we should do some behavioral studies. So again, a hasty generalization by linking vaccinations and autism. I'm sure you'll see many other hasty generalizations in your reading. The next type of logical fallacy is called limited choice. So, limited choice basically says P is false, therefore only P is true. It's kind of putting you in a corner and saying, oh, well, if you believe this, then that means you must also believe all of these things. Or if you don't believe this, then that must mean that you believe this other thing, right? It's kind of pigeonholing somebody into their beliefs. An example right here is fantastic. You don't support the president, so you're not a patriotic American, right? There are millions of us who are patriotic Americans who do not support the president. And so, of course, that those two things are not necessarily tied together all the time. You can be patriotic and have your own beliefs about what makes a good president. The next logical fallacy is appeal to emotion. So, appeal to emotion happens a lot in advertisement, particularly when when a particular company or an entity wants to make you feel or elicit a certain emotional response out of you in order to get you to buy in or to believe what they're doing. So the one I put right here is an advertisement from my childhood. It's an old tire commercial, and their slogan used to be "Because so much is riding on your tires," and they would have little pictures of babies, and then parents would say, "Oh, I can't let my baby ride in a car that doesn't have great tires. I need to go out and buy Michelin tires." Um, Another example could be like the ASPCA commercials, the pet commercials where they show the dogs that are really sad in little cages, and they say, "Oh, for $18 a month, you can rescue this pet." Well, chances are that pet has already been rescued if he's already on camera. But there is some other pet that you can go and rescue. You may not be able to see what that pet looks like, but they're going to make sure that they give you some sad-looking dogs and play Sarah McLachlan's "In the Arms of an Angel" in the background to make you feel so sad that you whip out your wallet and immediately throw money at them. The next type of logical fallacy is a personal attack. We've seen tons of personal attack in recent years. Um, Obviously, if you have a problem with some person or a group, then you're going to basically break down everything that they stand for because you want to discredit all the things that they believe in, right? The example I put right here says he may be a qualified candidate, but he has tattoos, so I won't vote for him, right? People that have personal attacks usually have some sort of like a prejudice or some preconceived hate towards another person or group of people. And so, really, all of their beliefs or any of that is secondary to whatever the hate is, right? So, in my example right here, whoever this person is doesn't like tattoos or doesn't think leaders should have tattoos or whatever. And so, regardless of whether they're qualified to be a good leader, they're not going to vote for them, right? That's a horrible personal attack. The next type of logical fallacy is called circular reasoning. Circular reasoning is just what it says. It's just going in a circle. So you're stating the conclusion, and then you're just restating the conclusion. Um, you're not really giving any part of a premise. Remember that a premise is like some observations or some support behind the conclusion. Um, but you're in these circular reasoning ones, you're not really doing that, right? In this example, you must obey the law because it's illegal to break the law, right? You're not giving any reasons why you must obey the law. You're just restating that the law is legal, and if you break it, it's illegal, right? Circular reasoning doesn't have any new information in it. It's just restating what you were saying before. Next, we have diversion. Diversion, or otherwise known as red herring, is just a way to get people off of the main idea and to kind of put some other conversation in their mind to get them distracted, essentially, right? The example I put here is when you are late getting home past curfew, you distract your parents by talking to them about the weather, how cold it is or how rainy it is, right? You walk in the door and they say, "It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Where have you been?" And you say, "Oh, wow, it's so nice outside today. I think I'm going to go and mow the lawn." Obviously, that's just you trying to get out of being in trouble, or you failed a test in your COLA 100E class, and your parents find out about it, and you tell them, "Oh, well, I'm doing great in my math class right now. My teacher's cool, and I understand everything's good." Well, you're not really talking about the fact that you failed your COLA class. You're just kind of filling them with good news, right? I'm sure we are all experts at putting the red herring on people that hold us accountable, like our parents. The next one is a straw man argument. So, a straw man argument is really kind of misconstruing somebody's personal beliefs towards something, kind of forcing them into some other thing. It's kind of a combination, I would think, of limited choice and personal attack. So, straw man has um, this almost like this diversion part to it. Like I want to jump off of the real thing, but it's more personal. This example that I put here says, after Will said we should put more money into health and education, Warren responded by saying that Will hates our country so much that he wants to leave it defenseless by cutting military spending. Right? Uh, Will said nothing about military spending. Warren used his information to jump to other conclusions and say, oh, well, if you want to put money into health and education, then we're going to have to cut money somewhere, so you must hate the military, right? So there's kind of this limited choice idea in there that you're taking their information and you're kind of twisting it, distorting it into something else, but it's also a personal, there's like a personal component there as well in strawman. Then lastly, we want to talk about the 5 different steps to evaluating media information. So when you're looking at these logical fallacies, whether you find them on the news or you find them, in a book or in the internet or whatever, these are the 5 important things that you should consider whether before you decide, okay, I value this source. This is a good source. You want to consider who that source is. Do you find them at like a reputable source before you saw this fact? Have you read their information before? Also, check the date. Things constantly change in our world, and something that may have been valid 3 or 4 months ago it doesn't necessarily make sense anymore. And so people can repurpose ideas to make them seem more modern when we've already gone over that. We've already decided this is a bad idea for one reason or another. So always look at that date. Make sure that it's something that's relevant to now and validate its accuracy. So when you're going to check a source, which is step 1, in that process, check where the source got their stuff from. So sometimes we play this big long game of telephone with information, and in the process, we can really lose what the facts were about that. So when you're wanting to look up information, you want to use it in your argument. Validate its accuracy. Know where it came from. Know that it came from somebody reputable. And if you are looking at something on the internet and it says it came from this source or whatever, go back and look at that source also. So don't just look at the one that you got it from. Look at where they got it from. Follow the trail back and make sure that it's coming from something reputable. Watch for hidden agendas. So if you find some really fascinating piece of information about something from some company or some entity that you've never heard of before, research that entity. What are they around for? Are they being supported by somebody's money? Do they have a bigger plan out there as far as getting this information across? Does the information that they're sending out, does that help them in some way or hurt their opponent in some way? And then lastly, don't miss the big picture, right? You always want to see everything in a total picture, in a total frame, some totality there. So don't take one piece of information and hold on to that as the only piece of information that matters, right? You should always be acquiring new information about something that you are passionate about so that you get the big picture on what's going on. So that's our first lecture in logical fallacies in chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Expect more coming soon.